Are you a real estate investor looking to sharpen your skills or a newbie looking to become one? You're in the right place. Welcome to Where Should I Invest? Real Estate Investing in Canada with your host, Sarah Larby.
Ashley, Spencer, welcome back to Where Should I Invest? It's definitely been a little bit of time since you guys were last on, but it's always so interesting. You do so much when it comes to short-term rental properties and are a wealth of knowledge. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having us. Always a pleasure to talk to you about this and catch up.
Awesome. So short-term rentals, let's go through, if somebody's hearing this for the first time, hearing from you for the first time, maybe just give us like a quick overview of like what it is that you guys do, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure. So our bread and butter is short-term rentals, predominantly in the Niagara area in Canada. We own personally, and then we also have a management company that specializes in vacation rentals, which we're up to about 45 to 50 properties across Canada. And we've also just really expanded into the US. We own 2 properties in Ellicottville, New York, and then we've recently expanded our management business there as well. So very short-term rental focused.
So what is the big difference between short-term rental and mid-term rental, long-term rental, like just like as a quick overview so that everybody can get on the same page?
Yeah, well, obviously, like from like the obvious standpoint is length of stay, right? Like, you have like your long term, which is like your yearly lease, kind of year over year, that type of tenant. They pay a consistent amount of rent every single month. Then you have your mid and short term, which is typically more of obviously a variable type rent, like midterm being usually over 28 days. So anywhere from like a 1 month to, 9 months or less stay. Again, that is still, you typically can bring in, the idea is a little bit more revenue than you would on the long term, but there are obviously the challenges of potential gaps if you're doing like a 28 day minimum. And then you've got your short term, which is typically for less than 28 days. Some people do 1 night minimums. We're big on 2, but now you're dealing with a lot more turnover. But at the end of the day, the idea is why we did short term is because it yielded for us the highest amount of revenue, which equated to higher cash flow. But as you kind of go down that ladder, there are more variables and more moving pieces. There's more turnover. You're dealing with multiple different people throughout the entire month. It's still not as predictable as like your long-term income that you're getting every single month, but there's benefits to both sides of the coin here in Ontario. There's you don't have to deal with the landlord tenant board and all of those things. So there's pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I have dipped my toes and I have, short-term, midterm and long-term. And I think, there's, like you said, pros and cons to both. And there's properties that, suit one or the other, one over the other. And I think I started dabbling in short-term, midterm back in 2018. And a lot of the properties, like I actually enjoy it more than long-term. But it's it definitely has, its challenges along the way. I think back in 2021, 2022, everybody was trying to figure out how to buy short-term rentals, or even just potentially get out of the city and bought a lot of cottages. And short-term rentals could be other things than cottages as well. But, at some point I was looking back and, during those years, every single day that could be rented was rented at like top dollar. Fast forward to, 2024, and times are quite different. And you guys have been in it for a while as well. Why don't you just share like maybe just like the experiences of like seeing what the pandemic and the high interest rates have really done to the industry, and if it really affected you guys, and maybe it affected you on some properties and not the other. Maybe there's some properties that did better over the years, but maybe share some of that if you don't mind.
Sure. So obviously it impacted us and our clients significantly. I don't think the high interest rates didn't impact anyone in like the real estate world, right? But I do feel like in the short-term rental space, it was really survival of the fittest. Those who are still in and maintain to be in the top 10% of their area still did well. Like from personal experience, we own a property in Niagara on the Lake. It was always on a variable mortgage. It was purchased in 2021, I believe, and it's an over $1 million property. So you can imagine what happened between 2021 and 2024 with a variable mortgage on an over $1 million property. And that house still consistently cash flows net profit anywhere around 50 to 60,000 at the end of the year in net profit, which I'd say is pretty successful. Would it do better if the interest rates had been lower? Yes. But we did everything we could with that property to make sure that it maintained to be in the top 10% in Niagara-on-the-Lake. So we are constantly reinvesting. We have outdoor amenities like a fire pit, hot tub, sauna, and all of our clients who invested in the design, the decor, the amenities, made it look very Instagrammable and very inviting. Those properties still do well despite where we are with real estate.
Yeah, I mean, looking and seeing what your competition has and is doing, and just making sure that you're better. So let's actually talk about that. I know you mentioned a few things, right, with the amenities. You talked about that and the furnishings, but if somebody is just brand new starting out and it's not, maybe it's Niagara, maybe it's a different location, what can they do that you've seen work really well to stand out and be in those top 10%? Or like, how do you even potentially even see what that looks like? What is the 10%? What is the 90%? What are they offering? And what is the 10%? Like, how do you even figure that out in the first place?
Yeah, I think kind of the general rules apply to any location. Like obviously when we're entering a new market, and even when we're in a new market, we want to look at what are the top earning properties look like, where are they? Because location can play a very important factor, but what do they offer? How do they photo? What type of amenities, views, things do they have that you could see, okay, you know what, there might be a common theme here as to why it's generating such high revenue, and kind of work backwards from there. I mean, every area is going to be different. If you've got, a beach area versus, a mountain type area versus the cottage style versus like an inner city place, like there's all types of properties that are going to be very successful and do things really, really well. So I would start with looking at, if you're brand new to the area, what are the top properties look like? How many beds, how many bathrooms, what's the square footage? And then work backwards on the amenities, right? Is there a consistent theme? Are they all waterfront? Or, do they all have hot tubs? They all have, professional photos. That to me is like a no-brainer, but still to this day, we still see over 50% of hosts having very, very, amateur style photos. And that's one of the cheapest amenities that you can add to your listing that's going to yield you way higher results. And long are the days of having an average listing and still doing well in this industry. Mm-hmm. Ashley said survival of the fittest. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, there's a lot more people in the market now, and you have to treat this professionally or it's not going to do well, right? You can't just set it and forget it and expect to make a ton of money on this. There's a lot of moving variables and a lot of moving pieces that you need to constantly pay attention to and action to be successful.
Absolutely. And it is, definitely more saturated than it used to be. I think, again, it depends on the area, but I think some areas are getting slightly, better. And a lot of people have decided to switch to long-term or sell, I think, over the last couple of years. So, there was a lot and, there's still a lot, but I think slowly it's kind of, rebalancing again. It'll take some time. Where have you had the most success advertising for your short-term properties, and where can somebody that's starting out go to once they have their pictures and they have everything ready to get their best opportunity to be visible?
So we're predominantly on Airbnb. To us, it still has the best and the highest brand equity in Canada. That being said, if you have a cottage, then I would probably look at like cottages in Canada and VRBO. I hear that they're a little bit better for like the cottages, but for us, we're still getting like 99% from Airbnb. Once you go into the US, VRBO definitely has a bigger footprint there, but we're still doing that and then working on a direct bookings platform. We've probably mentioned it before, but there's a governing body called TICO in Ontario. So basically, once you start taking money directly from guests, then you have to be certified under them, or it comes with heavy fines. So we're just going through the process of their certification.
Yeah, and I just add to that too. I find like the bigger properties, you don't necessarily have to be on so many channels. I do find like in the larger cities where you're talking like apartment units, like studio 1 bedrooms, where they kind of all blend in with the other 1,000 plus. That might make more sense to just be on so many different channels. But to us, and just what we've seen, is we've had tremendous success just being on one. And I know that might be against what a lot of other hosts might say out there, but to me, it's like, if you create your space good enough, you can be extremely cool, even in these conditions, even in these variable rate interest worlds. It really just comes down to paying attention to the market and actioning things that you know are going to drive revenue at that property. And it's really not that hard.
And I also want to add in there too, like once you get onto too many platforms, it's not like you're getting that many more eyes. Like typically we would see the same person might look on various platforms at the same listing. That doesn't mean you're getting additional guests looking at your place. And then it also would block your calendar, which other platforms don't love. So if Airbnb is seeing a third party block on your calendar, we don't really know their algorithm, but we suspect that that is what can start making you show up like lower in the search rankings, because they want a house that is open to Airbnb 365, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, as you're saying that, so I have a couple cottage, I have a small boutique resorts, which we also put on, you know, we put everything on Airbnb. One cottage I'm also on VRBO with, and then we do direct bookings with the resort as well. Airbnb still has probably 85% of my bookings. And I think it's, you know, and then I look at like the other Airbnb properties that I have that are also midterm that I do often and on, but it's still a big footprint. And I think it's just because they've been around for so long. You know, they spend millions on marketing. And if people are looking for that kind of stuff, I feel like that's where they usually go, you know, and start searching. Do you have any experience with Expedia? Like, have you gone through any other types of sites, or are you kind of happy with just Airbnb at this point?
Yeah, because of our portfolios, like larger luxury homes, we haven't touched the booking.coms and Expedia worlds. You know, we've talked to other hosts that do like the multiple units in a building type thing, and you know, they swear to be on booking.com and Expedia, but we've also heard horror stories about their insurance and, you know, how you can vet guests. Like I said, kind of going back to Airbnb has over 90% brand equity and market share in Canada specifically, that we know, just looking at the data. So we want to be, you know, very, very strong with them liking us. And because at the end of the day, it's really about getting attention to your property. You know, if your goal is from then, a lot of hosts are now trying to bring a direct marketing campaign, because obviously with Airbnb, they charge crazy fees on both sides. If you're receiving $2,000, guest is probably paying 2,400, 2,500. So, you know, there is that opportunity to kind of like arbitrage the difference in the middle, where the guest pays less, but you still make more. So a lot of the strategies that people are doing across, at least that we know of, North America, is using Airbnb to gain exposure to the property, but on the back end, having a direct marketing campaign to get the repeat guests and the referrals from people that have already stayed. So I think that seems to be kind of what everyone is trying to do right now, because technically you're doing business in someone else's backyard when you're leaving it up to any OTA, right? They could shut you down at any second for whatever reason. If you have a neighbor that just doesn't like you and calls in 3 fake parties, your listing could get suspended pretty quickly. So, you know, we've seen a little bit of everything, and, you know, those are some things that as a host, you're going to want to think of for longevity.
Yeah, and you bring a good point, right? Because I think many hosts that are still doing well on Airbnb are not taking the contact information or figuring out a way to contact the guests at a future date and marketing to them and how to do that. And I think like, I mean, even just like, I don't know if this was always a thing, but like when you go and you look at past guests on Airbnb, you can't even see their phone numbers anymore. They've blocked them, right? And I don't know if like that's new, potentially, or maybe it was always like that, but what are some of the things that you guys are doing on your end for, you know, marketing to repeat clients, and if you're taking that off of Airbnb at that point, or maybe you just have some suggestions based on experience?
Yeah, like I said, because we're in Ontario, there's those TICO regulations, but I mean, there's so many different areas that you can attack this, right? we know people that try to attack it from the second someone books on Airbnb, getting the guest to cancel and book direct. But I mean, a very simple one and a very obvious and easy one is after a guest stays and hopefully you've wowed them, they've had an amazing experience, you've got them, their emotions are already up because they just had such a great stay, hitting them with hey, a limited time offer. If you rebook with us, or if you know anyone that rebooks with us, we'll give you 10% off your next stay if you lock it in an X amount of time. What that does there is, because you are giving them 10% off by going direct, actually yields you 5+% more than you would have received for that actual stay. I mean, you have that room to play with, but this is where you can become more profitable, but still add more value. And if you really like the guests, you can just go direct with them and get the same amount, but then you're giving them a huge discount. There's so many different ways that you can do that. But yes, having their email and phone number alone, now you can start an email marketing campaign, right? Now you can reach out to them with like, hey, we have last minute availability and it's discounted at X rate. From there, you never know if they are in the area or they know someone that's in the area and, they forward the email. It's a very powerful tool, just again, from getting it from such a strong OTA and using it to your advantage.
And then also a lot of cities have regulations where you need to collect contact info for the guest as part of the bylaws. So Niagara-on-the-Lake is like that, where we need to get certain information from the guest. So we take that upon ourselves when we're able to send over a form that they have to fill out, which includes name, phone number, email address, all of that stuff that the city asks for, but we house.
Yeah. And especially you guys also have a management company that does this. So you're almost like held to a higher level where you really have to have your ducks in a row. You can't just play the game of, oops, I didn't know, and then the ignorance thing. But speaking of municipalities, I think, one of the things that first steps, right, is trying to figure out if there are bylaws against short-term rentals and what they look like, because it can definitely be very confusing. It's not like it's like an umbrella where like it's one size fits all, right? And so do you want to share some experience and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, you mentioned it. If you're starting out, do a ton of research. To be honest, I'm old school. I like to pick up the phone and call the city, just because, again, like some of these articles and these bylaws could have been written in 2019, and there might be amendments to it that you might not have found. So before you invest or start in anything, I would pick up the phone and call the city. If you're unsure about anything, say, hey, I'm looking at this property on this street. You don't have to give them the number if you don't want to. Just want to, looking at your zoning, like tell them that you've done some research, because a lot of the times if you don't, they're just going to say, go to our website, everything's on there. Say, hey, look, I've done the research, I've looked at the zoning, whether it's present or not. I just want to make sure we are good to go. And then you could even follow them up with an email just to be extra cautious, because every city is different, right? Niagara-on-the-Lake, for example, they're pretty open to it. They have their restrictions on how many bedrooms and kind of what areas you can and can't do and the type of property. But from there, it's pretty open for business. It doesn't have to be your primary residence. There's no limits on how many days you can rent it. It's pretty straightforward, but a lot of municipalities now are implementing the primary residence rule, where it has to be your primary residence and you kind of rent it out when you're not there. You don't have to physically be at the property in most of these places. Can't speak for every town, but you do have to show them somehow that it is your primary residence. So scalability becomes a bit more of a challenge in those areas. And then there are just some gray area places that don't have anything. And I would be cautious on that. I would make sure if you are going to enter an area that have those gray areas, that you have a backup plan or an exit plan if they do come in and outright ban it. Most places that have some sort of tourism, likely, not always, will go towards a licensing program, but I wouldn't necessarily just 100% bank on it, because again, if you buy $1 million property at a variable rate mortgage, and yes, the numbers make sense in short term, if that gets taken away and the value of your property hasn't increased, well, now you can be in a little bit of hot water, if not already drowning. So you need to be very, very careful and just assume, okay, if this doesn't go in our favor, do we add value to this property? Can we sell it? Can we rent it medium term and get, and cover our rear end? Or, not, maybe let's look at another area.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example was Hamilton when they came out in January. I mean, as soon as the NDP leader became the mayor of that town, we all knew that like short term was gone, or was coming to an end the way that we saw it. But yeah, so January of this past year, it's your primary residence. It has to be, right, and there's a bunch of other hoops that people have to jump in, but. And a lot of people went midterm at that point in time for those areas, or you go long term or you sell. But I think, you know, personally, being a landlord for so many years, they need to, you know, figure out what the LTB issues are and get things moving faster, because if we are trying to evict a tenant and it takes 12 months for non-payment of rent, or even 9 months for non-payment of rent, like, yeah, we're going to look for other options. And I think like once they really look and dig into that, yeah, there's, you know, probably still going to be some short-term and midterm, because that's just what it is. But from a cash flow standpoint, some people just need to make it work that way. But there might be more people open to long-term, provided that the rules are, you know, more balanced and equal between landlords and tenants. And many of us switch to short-term and midterm to get more control back. So, you know, again, I think there's a bigger issue at stake there. But what are, like, in your opinion, maybe the top 3 benefits of adding short-term rentals to your portfolio? Personally, me, I think there is a need for having all of that in your portfolio, your midterm, your short-term, and your long-term, maybe some student rentals or whatever. But for you, you know, what your guys' opinions are, what are like really the top 3 benefits of short-term rentals?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, like you just mentioned, you know, the last few years, so many people have kind of made so many different moves. They've moved their short-term rentals out. We actually saw like a lot of our properties that we've had, you know, the ones that we own, but a lot that we've managed throughout this entire storm, or whatever you want to call it. And, you know, this year alone, they've broken records year over year because they've stood out in the market. And I think a lot of it comes to the fact that people got in, they didn't go 100% in on it. They kind of just, you know, we'll throw some furniture down. We're not going to put the hot tub in yet. We're going to see how it does. And then obviously it doesn't do well enough where they just back out and move on. Because of that, I think we've seen, I mean, we've had so many of our top properties just perform more year over year just by making small additions every single year and reinvesting back into the property. I mean, I would say that that's kind of like the most important, and like one of the number one things is going to do this, do it right? Go all in, think longevity. This isn't I want to make all my money back in year 1 thing. Like, obviously that's great if you do. And, you know, you do want to have a cap on how long it takes to return your income. But most hotels that go live, that, you know, develop and spend a ton of money to go live, they're not super profitable in year 1. Like, you know, I can't speak for all of them, but it takes time to build a track record, and it takes time to really have that impression on people of like, hey, these hosts are incredible. This property is immaculate, and I want to come back year over year and tell all my friends and family about this. That's how you want all your guests leaving.
And I think, so obviously cash flow is going to be like your number one benefit, right? Number 2, you don't like your guests, it's fine. It's short term. You wait a couple days and they're out. Which I really like. And then number 3 is usually, like, you can make it very automated, and you can make it passive if you choose to. So I wouldn't say in general that running a short-term rental is passive income, because it's not. It is active. It's hospitality, not real estate. It's 24/7. But there are a lot of things you can do to automate and systemize a lot of things so that it is controlled, it's concise, everyone knows what they're doing without you needing to be in it. And if you really, really want to hand over the reins, that's why we started Travel Lux, which is our short-term rental property management company for our owners who really are just like, I want the money and the cash flow. I don't want to deal with it. So you can make it passive that way. So I feel like those are probably the top 3 benefits. And there's pros and cons to every single one, like you were saying, right? Like, there's pros and cons to having a long-term rental, midterm, and we have all of those in our portfolio as well.
So let's talk about Travel Lux, because you guys have a property management company that works. I'm sure you have your own properties in there as well, and you take others' properties. And it sounds like you just recently went into New York State and went into the US as well a little bit, which is awesome. What does that look like? So, like, if somebody has a short term or a property and they're like, I'm going to short term this, or I want to just put on the rental, like short term rental market instead of long term. Let's just say it's not even furnished, right? And they call you up. What is the process? Like, do you literally do everything from start to finish, or does it have to be already furnished? Maybe walk us through that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of hiring a property management company is like you're dealing with professionals, right? People that are going to do it as well as you were to do it if you were to go all in on it. So like that's kind of like the reason why you would handle it. In terms of what we do, we talk to people from the very beginning stages of people that don't even have a property yet, and you know where to look, what areas they suggest. Like we kind of get all different types of people. I'd say that's kind of the majority of the people that we get. We get a lot of people saying, hey, I'm looking to invest. What areas would you suggest? You know, here's the properties that I'm looking at. We try to steer them in a decent direction just because we do have a fairly good knowledge base of, you know, the bylaws and so on and so forth. But then we get a lot of people that have a property that are looking to move it over. At the end of the day, like we run so many revenue projections for a lot of our clients that we never do business with, and that's fine because the most important thing is if you are starting is to do your due diligence. So I feel like that's where we spend a lot of the time up front with our clients. Like there's a lot of times where people will bring us a property and we'll straight up say, look, we do not recommend it, right? As much as they would probably want to give us the business and we would like the business, at the end of the day, if this relationship's not going to be successful, it's not going to be a good one. So we'd rather kind of part ways at the beginning. But that being said, assuming we move past that part, everything ticks and ties, you know, we have so many different people that we work with, and depending on which stage is that. If it's not furnished, fully kind of blank canvas, if you want to call it that, we would recommend working with the design teams that we work with, because that itself pays dividends, you know, year over year if you know the decoration side isn't your forte. So sometimes clients that we deal with, they're super good with that. So all we have to do is tell them the amenities that need to exist at this property, and they take it and run with it. But you know, there's a lot of clients that don't really know where to start. So at that point, we would refer them, or we would introduce them to the teams that we use, even on our personal properties, to get them started in the right foot. And then once, you know, assuming everything's up and running, we go in and do a very detailed supply check. We give them a supply list to make sure that everything's, you know, set up. Again, if they can't do that, we have people that will go in and do that as well. And then, yeah, from your everyday operations, we kind of dive in. Like, I feel like a big one that a lot of us really on is the revenue management side. Like, you know, guest messaging and stuff like that, people can text, people can call, like that side's, it's not hard, it's just time consuming. And yes, that is definitely a benefit of hiring management companies. You don't have to deal with people calling you and texting you all the time, but it's easy. Where I see people struggle, where I think a real benefit in hiring a professional management company is the revenue management side, the marketing and the revenue management side, setting the property up so it's marketable, it looks great, it has the right things to succeed, but also knowing how to capitalize top dollars, but also still ensure that you have revenue coming in the slowest seasons. And that really comes down to just, again, paying attention to the market, looking at competition, looking at trends, and taking advantage and changing that dynamic pricing strategy constantly to ensure that you're not leaving money on the table in high season, because that's the number one mistake people make, but also you're not too high for slow seasons, so that you're at 0% those slow, you know, here win months that you want to try to get those far in advance. So I would say the management companies that do all of that, if they're saying the right things, like they have a robust revenue management strategy, they're constantly looking at competition, they're constantly looking at optimizing the listing, you know, that's kind of what you're looking for a management company.
Absolutely. Now, for your specific management company at Travel Lux, like what areas do you cover? Like if somebody has a property in BC, my guess is you're not going to go to BC, but maybe just give us a range of like the space that you are managing.
So Niagara, which we'll call like Hamilton Down, is sort of our bread and butter. It's where we have the majority of our clients. We are in the GTA as well. We abide by all of their bylaws. So we have fewer properties, but we'll take on like really good ones there. Kawartha Lakes for us has really been growing like crazy, which has been amazing to see because they do so well. And we're in Haldeman and Norfolk County as well. That's their like
Port
Port
Dover.
Dover, Dunville, Port Stanley, that kind of area, which is like very like cottagey as well. And then we're in Ellicottville, New York. Anything I'm missing?
Well, yeah, we're always expanding. That's the thing. Like, if there's a case for it, we've got to the point now where we can systemize things and get things running. Like, for us, we do not want to sacrifice quality for quantity. So those are the areas that we're already set up in right now. But yeah, we're expanding quite a bit in the United States, all over Canada. But those are our strong markets right now.
And how we know when to expand is we like to have someone like a boots on the ground person there, because we don't want, like, we've had people come to us and be like, I'd love for you to expand to this region, but we don't have anyone in place. And like Spencer said, we never want to just take on business, but our quality there for that client, because then just company a bad name. So we're always looking for people who are willing to be that person who's going to help us expand into a new area. And though typically for us, they tend to be real estate agents because they have such a good knowledge of the market. They understand where all the good places are, what would do well, what would do like wouldn't do well. They usually have flexibility of schedule. So that's been really successful for us.
And they get a lot of referrals for us too, just on the real estate side, because we have a lot of people that reach out that are looking, like we said, but they don't have representation. So it kind of works hand in hand when they have an expert that's a realtor in the area and knows that side of the business, but also an expert in short-term rentals and has a good knowledge of what does really well. So yeah, it's been a good synergy so far.
Yeah, that is interesting. So as you're finding new markets and new potential realtors, do they become partners, or are they getting like paid by the hour? Like, I'm just curious how you've structured that.
Yeah, so they're independent contractors. We teach them everything. We give them the leads. We do all the pricing, all of the fun stuff, and they do more of the sales, boots on the ground, and it's more of a profit share. So typically we're about 20% of gross rent, and then we would split profit 50-50.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I mean, it's probably the easiest, most efficient way to scale, right? If you're planning on growing the business, like you said, you have to have feet on the ground, and somebody that you can trust that likely will share in the business versus just an hourly thing. Because an hourly thing, I don't think you'll be able to get the people that care as much. I'm sure like the realtors may be like, oh, well, there's going to be some leads here and there, but it's definitely different when you're bringing somebody in that capacity. So,
and it gets really profitable, like up to after like 10 properties, like you're looking at, especially in the summer, you're looking at like over 10,000 a month in profit usually. So it is a very profitable venture for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody's interested in either partnering with you, a realtor listening to this as an example, or somebody with a property, and they are interested in figuring out, how to market it better, potentially, I think you have some marketing options, or, having you guys property manage, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Reaching out to us personally, like on Instagram, Spencer and Ashley, is probably the only way we've ever expanded. I think that's how we've found and connected with everyone, which is crazy that social media has brought in.
We actually met on social media.
Did, yeah.
On Instagram. And then we decided to all go for lunch like years ago, but that's actually how, anyways, I digress, but yes.
Exactly. Case in point.
Yeah, that would be the best spot. Yeah.
Sorry, is it Ashley and Spencer, right? At Ashley
And Ashley.
Spencer and Ashley. Okay.
And not the symbol.
Exactly. All right. On Instagram only.
Yeah, that's but like we're checking that predominantly. So like emails get lost.
We have a website, it's spencerandashley.com, but it's our email and stuff's in there as well. But Instagram will probably be the fastest response.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So what's next for you guys?
I think so. Our last few years, we've really focused on the management business and systemizing it and making our processes really airtight. We do a lot of like guidebook videos for the guests, but also for ourselves. We call them like their vid guides. So like their how-to videos on how to do all of our internal processes. That's been what we've done the last few years. But personally, Spencer and I are ready to do more on the personal side in terms of acquiring. So we've identified different markets that we still feel like has a ton of potential, that and lower prices for homes that we still feel like you can put some like renovations in and they perform really, really well as a short-term rental. So yeah, that's going to be our focus. We've been looking at either raising capital or having partners and kind of doing that on repeat and finding other markets to do that. But I think that will be the focus probably for the next few years.
Awesome. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the show. At Spencer and Ashley on Instagram. Reach out to them, and thanks for being a guest. I feel like you guys have been on probably like 3 or 4 times, but you are like the first people I think about when I think about short-term rentals for Ontario, and your expansion over the years and your growth has been remarkable. Congratulations, guys.
Oh, thank you. Thanks again for having us. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to Where Should I Invest with your host, Sarah Larby. Make sure to listen in next time. We'll catch you on the next episode of Where Should I Invest?